Section 2 of Across Asia on a Bicycle. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Louis James Mordier. Across Asia on a Bicycle by Thomas Allen. Chapter 2. Across the Bosporus. Part 2. About noon on April the 20th, our road turned abruptly into the broad caravan trail that runs between Smyrna and Caesarea, about 10 miles west of the latter city. A long caravan of camels was moving majestically up the road, headed by a little donkey, which the Devediji camel driver was riding with his feet dangling almost to the ground. That proverbially stubborn creature moved not a muscle until we came alongside, when all at once he gave one of his characteristic side lurches and precipitated the rider to the ground. The first camel, with a protesting grunt, began to sidle off, and a broadside movement continued down the line till the whole caravan stood at an angle of about 45 degrees to the road. The camel of Asia Minor does not share that antipathy for the equine species which is so general among their Asiatic cousins, but steel horses were more than even they could endure. A sudden turn in the road brought us in sight of old Arjish Dar, which towers 13,000 feet above the city of Caesarea, and whose head and shoulders were covered with snow. Native tradition tells us that against this lofty summit the Ark of Noah struck in the rising flood, and for this reason Noah cursed it, and prayed that it might ever be covered with snow. It was in connection with this very mountain that we first conceived the idea of making the ascent of Ararat. Here and there, on some of the most prominent peaks, we could distinguish little mounds of earth, the ruined watchtowers of the prehistoric Hittites. Caesarea, ancient Caesarea, is filled with the ruins and the monuments of the 14th century Seljuk. Arrowheads and other relics are every day unearthed there to serve as toys for the street urchins. Since the development of steam communication around the coast, it is no longer the caravan centre that it used to be, but even now its charshi, or enclosed bazaars, are among the finest in Turkey, being far superior in appearance to those of Constantinople. These charshi are nothing more than narrow streets, enclosed by brick arches, and lined on either side with booths. It was through one of these that our only route to the Khan lay, and yet we felt that in such contracted quarters, and in such an excited mob as had gathered around us, disaster was sure to follow. Our only salvation was to keep ahead of the jam, and get through as soon as possible. We started on the spurt, and the race began. The unsuspecting merchants and their customers were suddenly distracted from their thoughts of gain as we whirled by, the crowd close behind, sweeping everything before it. The falling of barrels and boxes, the rattling of tin cans, the crashing of crockery, the howling of the vagrant dogs that were trampled underfoot only added to the general tumult. Through the courtesy of Mr. Pete of the American Bible House at Constantinople, we were provided with letters of introduction to the missionaries of Caesarea, as well as elsewhere along our route for Asiatic Turkey, and upon them we also had drafts to the amount of our deposit made at the Bible House before starting. Besides, we owed much to the hospitality and kindness of these people. The most striking feature of the missionary work of Caesarea is the education of the Armenian women, whose social position seems to be even more degraded than that of their Turkish sisters. With the native Armenians, as with the Turks, fleshiness adds much to the price of a wife. The wife of a missionary is to them an object both of wonderment and contempt. As she walks along the street, they will whisper to one another, "There goes a woman who knows all her husband's business, and who can manage just as well as himself." This will generally be followed in an undertone by the expression Madana Satana, which means in common parlance, a female devil. At first it was a struggle to overcome this ignorant prejudice, and to get girls to come to the school free of charge. Now, it is hard to find room for them, even when they are asked to pay for their tuition. The costume of the Armenian woman is generally of some bright-coloured cloth, prettily trimmed. Her coiffure, always elaborate, sometimes includes a string of gold coins encircling the head, or strung down the plait. A silver belt encloses the waist, and a necklace of coins calls attention to her pretty neck. When washing clothes by the stream, they frequently show a gold ring encircling an ankle. In the simplicity of their costumes, as well as in the fact that they do not expose the face, the Turkish women stand in strong contrast to the Armenian. Baggy trousers à la bloomer, a loose robe skirt opening at the sides, and a voluminous shawl-like girdle around the waist and body constitute the main features of the Turkish indoor costume. On the street a shroud-like robe called yashmak, usually white, but sometimes crimson, purple, or black, covers them from head to foot. When we would meet a bevy of these creatures on the road in the dusk of evening, their white fluttering garments would give them the appearance of winged celestials. The Turkish women are generally timorous of men, and especially so of foreigners. Those of the rural districts, however, are not so shy as their city cousins. We frequently met them at work in groups about the villages or in the open fields, and would sometimes ask for a drink of water. If they were a party of maidens, as was often the case, they would draw back and hide behind one another. We would offer one of them a ride on our very nice horses. This would cause a general giggle among her companions, and a drawing of the yashmak closer about the neck and face. The road scenes in the interior provinces are but little varied. One of the most characteristic features of the Anatolian landscape are the storks, which come in flocks of thousands from their winter quarters in Egypt, and build summer nests unmolested on the village housetops. These, like the crows, magpies, and swallows, prove valuable allies to their husbandmen in their war against the locusts. A still more serviceable friend in this direction is the smarmar, a pink thrush with black wings. Besides the various caravan trains of camels, donkeys, horses, and mules, the road is frequently dotted with ox carts run on solid wooden wheels without tires, and drawn by that peculiar bovine species, the buffalo. With their distended necks, elevated snouts, and hog-like bristles, these animals present an ugly appearance, especially when wallowing in mud puddles. Now and then, in the villages, we passed by a primitive flour mill moved by a small stream playing upon a horizontal wheel beneath the floor, or more primitive still, by a blindfolded donkey plodding ceaselessly around in his circular path. In the streets, we frequently encountered boys and old men, gathering manure for their winter fuel, and now and then a cripple or invalid would accost us as Hakim, doctor, for the medical work of the missionaries has given these simple-minded folk the impression that all foreigners are physicians. Coming up and extending a hand for us to feel the pulse, they would ask us to do something for the disease, which we could see was rapidly carrying them to the grave. Our first view of Sivas was obtained from the top of Mount Yildiz, on which still stands the ruined castle of Mithridates, the Pontine monarch, whom Lucullus many times defeated but never conquered. From this point we made a very rapid descent, crossed the Kizil Irmak for the third time by an old ruined bridge, and half an hour later saw the Stars and Stripes flying above the U.S. consulate. In the society of our representative, Mr. Henry M. Jewett, we were destined to spend several weeks. For a day or two after our arrival, one of us was taken with a slight attack of typhoid fever, supposed to have been contracted by drinking from the roadside streams. No better place could have been chosen for such a mishap, for recovery was speedy in such comfortable quarters, under the care of the missionary ladies. The comparative size and prosperity of Sivas, in the midst of rather barren surroundings, are explained by the fact that it lies at the converging point of the chief caravan routes between the Euxine, Euphrates, and Mediterranean. Besides being the capital of Rumili, the former Seljuk province of Cappadocia, it is the place of residence for a French and American consular representative, and an agent of the Russian government for the collection of the war indemnity, stipulated in the Treaty of '78. The dignity of office is here upheld with something of the pomp and splendor of the East, even by the representative of democratic America. In our tours with Mr. Jewett, we were escorted at the head by a Circassian kavass, Turkish police, clothed in a long black coat, with a huge dagger dangling from a belt of cartridges. Another native kavass with a broadsword dragging at his side, usually brought up the rear. At night he was the one to carry the huge lantern, which, according to the number of candles, is the insignia of rank. "I must give the Turks what they want," said the consul, with a twinkle in his eye. "Form and red tape. I would not be a consul in their eyes if I didn't." To illustrate the formality of Turkish etiquette, he told this story. A Turk was once engaged in saving furniture from his burning home, when he noticed that a bystander was rolling a cigarette. He immediately stopped in his hurry, struck a match, and offered a light. The most flagrant example of Turkish formality that came to our notice was the following address on an official document to the Sultan: "The Arbiter, the Absolute, the soul and body of the universe, the father of all sovereigns of the earth. His Excellency the Eagle Monarch, the cause of the never-changing order of things, the source of all honor, the son of the Sultan of Sultans, under whose feet we are dust, whose awful shadow protects us. Abdul Hamid II, son of Abdul Mejid, whose residence is in paradise. Our glorious Lord, to whose sacred body be given health and strength and endless days, whom Allah keeps in his palace, and on his throne with joy and glory forever. Amen." This is not the flattery of a cringing subordinate, but the same spirit is revealed in an address by the Sultan himself to his Grand Vizier. "Most honoured Vizier, maintainer of the good order of the world, director of public affairs with wisdom and judgment, accomplisher of the important transactions of mankind with intelligence and good sense, consolidator of the edifice of empire and of glory, endowed by the Most High with abundant gifts, and Monshir at this time of my gate of felicity, my Vizier Mehmed Pasha, may God be pleased to preserve him long in exalted dignity." The Turks cannot be called lazy, yet they like to take their time. Patience, they say, belongs to God. Hurry to the devil. Nowhere is this so well illustrated as in the manner of shopping in Turkey. This was brought particularly to our notice when we visited the Sivas bazaars to examine some inlaid silverware, for which the place is celebrated. The customer stands in the street, inspecting the articles on exhibition. The merchant sits on his heels on the booth floor. If the customer is of some position in life, he climbs up and sits down on a level with the merchant. If he is a foreigner, the merchant is quite deferential. A merchant is not a merchant at all, but a host entertaining a guest. Coffee is served, then a cigarette rolled up and handed to the guest, while the various social and other local topics are freely discussed. After coffee and smoking, the question of purchase is gradually approached, not abruptly, as that would involve a loss of dignity, but circumspectly, as if the buying of anything were a mere afterthought. Maybe, after half an hour, the customer has indicated what he wants, and after discussing the quality of the goods, the customer asks the price in an offhand way, as though he were not particularly interested. The merchant replies, "Oh, whatever your highness pleases," or "I shall be proud if your highness will do me the honour to accept it as a gift." This means nothing whatever, and is merely the introduction to the haggling which is sure to follow. The seller, with silken manners and brazen countenance, will always name a price 4 times as large as it should be. Then the real business begins. The buyer offers 1/2 or 1/4 of what he finally expects to pay, and a war of words, in a blustering tone, leads up to the close of this everyday farce. The superstition of the Turks is nowhere so apparent as in their fear of the evil eye. Jugs placed around the edge of the roof, or an old shoe filled with garlic and blue beets, blue glass balls or rings, are a sure guard against this illusion. Whenever a pretty child is playing upon the street, the passers-by will say, "Oh, what an ugly child!" for fear of inciting the evil spirit against its beauty. The peasant classes in Turkey are of course the most superstitious, because they are the most ignorant. They have no education whatever, and can neither read nor write. Stamboul is the only great city of which they know. Paris is a term signifying the whole outside world. An American missionary was once asked, "In what part of Paris is America?" Yet it can be said that they are generally honest and always patient. They earn from about 6 to 8 cents a day. This will furnish them with ekmek and pilaw, and that is all they expect. They eat meat only on feast days, and then only mutton. The tax gatherer is their only grievance. They look upon him as a necessary evil. They have no idea of being ground down under the oppressor's iron heel. Yet they are happy because they are contented and have no envy. The poorer, the more ignorant a Turk is, the better he seems to be. As he gets money and power and becomes contaminated by Western civilization, he deteriorates. A resident of 20 years' experience said, "In the lowest classes I have sometimes found truth, honesty, and gratitude. In the middle classes seldom, in the highest never." The corruptibility of the Turkish official is almost proverbial, but such is to be expected in a land where the public treasury is regarded as a sea, and who does not drink of it as a pig? Peculation and malversation are fully expected in the public official. They are necessary evils, a debt. Custom has made them so. Offices are sold to the highest bidder. The Turkish official is one of the politest and most agreeable of men. He is profuse in his compliments, but he has no conscience as to bribes, and little regard for virtue as its own reward. We are glad to be able to record a brilliant, though perhaps theoretical, exception to this general rule. At Kokhisar, on our way from Sivas to Karahisar, a delay was caused by a rather serious break in one of our bicycles. In the interval, we were the invited guests of a district Qadi, a venerable-looking and genial old gentleman, whose acquaintance we had made in an official visit on the previous day, as he was then the acting Kaimakam mayor. His house was situated in a neighbouring valley, in the shadow of a towering bluff. We were ushered into the Salamluk, or guest apartment, in company with an Armenian friend, who had been educated as a doctor in America, and who had consented to act as interpreter for the occasion. The Qadi entered with a smile on his countenance, and made the usual picturesque form of salutation by describing the figure 3 with his right hand from the floor to his forehead. Perhaps it was because he wanted to be polite that he said he had enjoyed our company on the previous day, and had determined, if possible, to have a more extended conversation. With the usual coffee and cigarettes, the Qadi became informal and chatty. He was evidently a firm believer in predestination, as he remarked that God had foreordained our trip to that country. Even the food we were to eat, and the invention of the extraordinary cart on which we were to ride. The idea of such a journey in such a peculiar way was not to be accredited to the ingenuity of man. There was a purpose in it all. When we ventured to thank him for his hospitality toward 2 strangers, and even foreigners, he said that this world occupied so small a space in God's dominion that we could well afford to be brothers one to another, in spite of our individual beliefs and opinions. "We may have different religious beliefs," said he, "but we all belong to the same great Father of humanity, just as children of different complexions, dispositions, and intellects may belong to one common parent. We should exercise reason always, and have charity for other people's opinions." From charity the conversation naturally turned to justice. We were much interested in his opinion on this subject, as that of a Turkish judge and rather high official. "Justice," said he, "should be administered by the humblest person. Though a king should be the offending party, all alike must yield to the sacred law of justice. We must account to God for our acts, and not to men." The regular route from Sivas to Erzurum passes through Erzincan. From this, however, we diverged at Zara, in order to visit the city of Karahisar and the neighbouring Licisi mines, which had been pioneered by the Genoese explorers and were now being worked by a party of Englishmen. This divergence onto unbeaten paths was made at a very inopportune season, for the rainy spell set in, which lasted with scarcely any intermission for over a fortnight. At the base of Kosadar, which stands upon the watershed between the 2 largest rivers of Asia Minor, the Kazil Irmak and the Yeşil Irmak, our road was blocked by a mountain freshet, which at its height washed everything before it. We spent a day and night on its bank, in a primitive flour mill, which was so far removed from domestic life that we had to send 3 miles up in the mountains to get something to eat. The Yeşil Irmak, which we crossed just before reaching Karahisar, was above our shoulders as we waded through, holding our bicycles and baggage over our heads. While the swift current rolled the small boulders against us and almost knocked us off our feet, there were no bridges in this part of the country. With horses and wagons, the rivers were usually fordable. And what more would you want? With the Turk, as with all Asiatics, it is not a question of what is better, but what will do. Long before we reached a stream, the inhabitants of a certain town or village would gather round and with troubled countenances say, "Christian gentlemen, there is no bridge," pointing to the river beyond and graphically describing that it was above our horses' heads. That would settle it, they thought. It never occurred to them that a Christian gentleman could take off his clothes and wade. Sometimes, as we walked along the mud, the wheels of our bicycles became so clogged that we could not even push them before us. In such a case, we would take the nearest shelter, whatever it might be. The night before reaching Karahisar, we entered an abandoned stable from which everything had fled, except the fleas. Another night was spent in the pine forests, just on the border between Asia Minor and Armenia, which were said to be the haunts of the border robbers. Our surroundings could not be relieved by a fire for fear of attracting their attention. When at last we reached the Trebizond-Erzurum highway at Bayburt, the contrast was so great that the scaling of Kop Dağ on its comparatively smooth surface was a mere breakfast spell. From here we looked down for the first time into the valley of the historic Euphrates, and a few hours later we were skimming over its bottomlands towards the embattled heights of Erzurum. As we neared the city, some Turkish peasants in the fields caught sight of us and shouted to their companions, "Russians! Russians!" And there they are, 2 of them! This was not the first time we had been taken for the subjects of the Tsar. The whole country seemed to be in dread of them. Erzurum is the capital of that district, which Russia will no doubt demand if the stipulated war indemnity is not paid. The entrance into the city was made to twist and turn among the ramparts, so as to avoid a rush in case of an attack. But this was no proof against the surprise in the case of the noiseless wheel. In we dashed with a roaring wind, past the affrighted guards, and were 50 yards away before they could collect their scattered senses. Then suddenly it dawned upon them that we were human beings and foreigners besides, perhaps even the dreaded Russian spies. They took after us at full speed, but it was too late. Before they reached us, we were in the house of the Commandant Pasha, the military governor, to whom we had a letter of introduction from our consul at Sivas. That gentleman we found extremely good-natured. He laughed heartily at our escapade with the guards. Nothing would do but we must visit the Vali, the civil governor, who was also a pasha of considerable reputation in Italy. We had intended, but not so soon, to pay an official visit to the Vali, to present our letter from the Grand Vizier, and to ask his permission to proceed to Bayazid, whence we had planned to attempt the ascent of Mount Ararat, an experience which will be described in the next chapter. A few days before we heard, a similar application had been made by an English traveller from Baghdad, but owing to certain suspicions, the permission was refused. It was with no little concern, therefore, that we approached the Vali's private office, in company with his French interpreter. Circumstances augured ill at the very start. The Vali was evidently in a bad humour, for we overheard him storming in a high key at someone in the room with him. As we passed under the heavily matted curtains, the 2 attendants who were holding them up cast a rather horrified glance at our dusty shoes and unconventional costume. The Vali was sitting in a large armchair in front of a very small desk, placed at the far end of a vacant-looking room. After the usual salams, he motioned to a seat on the divan, and proceeded at once to examine our credentials, while we sipped at our coffees and whiffed the small cigarettes which were immediately sent. This furnished the Vali an opportunity to regain his usual composure. He was evidently an autocrat of the severest type. If we pleased him, it would be all right. If we did not, it would be all wrong. We showed him everything we had, from our Chinese passport to the little photographic camera, and related some of the most amusing incidents of our journey through his country. From the numerous questions he asked, we felt certain of his genuine interest, and were more than pleased to see an occasional broad smile on his countenance. "Well," said he, as we rose to take leave, "your passports will be ready any time after tomorrow. In the meantime, I shall be pleased to have your horses quartered and fed at government expense." This was a big joke for a Turk, and assured us of his goodwill. A bicycle exhibition, which the Vali had requested, was given the morning of our departure for Bayazid, on a level stretch of road just outside the city. Several missionaries and members of the consulates had gone out in carriages and formed a little group by themselves. We rode up with the Stars and Stripes and Star and Crescent fluttering side by side from the handlebars. It was always our custom, especially on diplomatic occasions, to have a little flag of the country associated with that of our own. The little arrangement evoked a smile from the Vali, who, when the exhibition was finished, stepped forward and said, "I am satisfied, I am pleased." His richly caparisoned white charger was now brought up. Leaping into the saddle, he waved us good-bye, and moved away with his suite towards the city. We ourselves remained for a few moments to bid good-bye to our hospitable friends, and then once more continued our journey toward the east. End of section 2.